Welcome to the fourth podcast in our series, Creating a Caregiver's Toolbox. I am Paula Pagan. I'm a licensed social worker and owner of Long Island Elder Care. I've worked in the field of social work for over 30 years, and my mission has always been to provide seamless services for my clients and their families. We provide in-person and telehealth mental health counseling to seniors in our office in Smithtown. We also provide mental health counseling to seniors in assisted living programs. In addition to mental health counseling, I'm a CEU provider for social workers and case managers. I take a very proactive approach to treatment, and I want my clients to educate themselves about the services that are available to them. We always want to avoid emergency-driven planning. We need support and coping tools to move forward in our lives. We are here to help. We appreciate Frank Melia, CMPS from Contour Mortgage, for giving us this opportunity to do this podcast in his beautiful studio in Garden City. So today I am very happy to introduce Meghan Shergill, who's Vice President of the CDPAP program for Community Care, Home Care. So hi, Meghan. So nice to see you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So let's start with the basics. What does CDPAP stand for?
Sure. So CDPAP, it's an acronym, and as you know, there's so many acronyms in home care. It stands for the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program, and this is the home care alternative where you can have someone who has Medicaid receive home care services. They can hire caregivers who are loved ones to them, and they can get paid through Medicaid. So individuals who have Medicaid can have the autonomy and independence of choosing their caregivers to act under their home care services as their personal assistants. So typically people think of these people as, the caregivers can be family members, friends, but it can also be neighbors, church members, really anyone that you want to be the caregiver of your home care services.
So that's so wonderful for everybody to know about. So tell us about the program and how it works for families.
Sure. So the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program, the consumer being the person receiving the home care services, if that person is considered to be alert and oriented, they have the ability to act as their own boss of their home care services. So that then has a realm of responsibilities of what they have to do under this program. That consumer is in charge of finding their own caregivers, training their caregivers, coordinating their shifts, and monitoring the work that they do. And some people thrive with this program if you're a type A, very organized type of personality, like I am myself, because you want that ownership and that responsibility. In this program, let's say the consumer is not considered to be alert and oriented, you can then still have someone act as your designated representative to act as the boss of the home care services. Let's say mom who has dementia wants home care services, or the family wants home care services for her. She's not considered to be alert and oriented, but they can then assign someone to act as her designated representative to be the boss of the home care services, so they can still hire someone to care for mom that mom knows, loves, and trusts, and it enhances independence but also privacy.
Which is so important, really.
So important.
Are there any exclusions at all as to who could be the caregiver of someone needing home care services?
That's a great question. It's easier first for me to tell you who can be the caregiver, and then I'll tell you who's excluded. So the caregivers under the CDPAP program, which is a Medicaid-funded program from New York State Department of Health, the caregivers have to be at least 18 years old, right? They have to be an adult. They also have to be eligible for employment in the United States. That doesn't mean that they have to be a citizen, right? They can have like a working visa or something, but they have to be eligible for employment in the United States. Any exclusions really are just, it obviously has to be an adult, so they can't be children working as the caregivers. The caregiver can't be the legal spouse of the person receiving the home care services. A lot of people think, if I needed home care services, maybe my husband could be my caregiver. Not in this program, there's a conflict of interest. And then the other exclusion would be, let's say there's an individual with special needs, like maybe a child who needs home care services. The parent can be paid to be the caregiver only once the child is 21 years old or older. So a lot of people default to thinking in the special needs community that maybe little Johnny is not eligible for CDPAP home care services until he's 21, because then that's when the parent can pay or get paid to be the caregiver. but there is no minimum or maximum age of who can receive CDPAP services. So we truly have people on our program who are 2 years old and 102 years old. And until little Johnny is perhaps 21 years old, he can have anyone else who loves him and that the family trusts act as his caregiver. So we have families who have maybe an adult sibling act as the caregiver, right? Or a beloved family friend. So there's just so many opportunities. This program enhances independence, privacy, control, and choice.
Which everybody wants to keep.
I think, yeah.
What are some tips for interviewing a potential caregiver if you don't have somebody already available to you?
Yeah, so like I said, a lot of families default to choosing family to act as the caregivers for their loved ones who needs home care services. But it doesn't just have to be family, so it can also be friends, neighbors, church members, etc. Some people want the enhanced responsibility and independence of the CDPAP program, but they can't find caregivers. So New York State Department of Health tells, or under their regulations and rules, does not permit the home care agency like Community Care to become involved with interviewing caregivers, screening them, or choosing the caregivers for the families. However, as a courtesy, we do offer best practices for families of how to find caregivers. And the timing is really great because actually next month we're hosting an educational workshop virtually with best practices for how to find caregivers.
Wow.
Yeah.
When is it going to be?
July 12th, which is a Wednesday evening from 6 till 7:30 p.m. And it's going to go over all the best practices and real case studies of how it's worked for families on our program.
So how can we find out about it? Can we email you?
I always recommend that people follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn, if you have a LinkedIn, because that's where we're always promoting our upcoming educational workshops. And that's something that Community Care, we're very proud about doing differently than some other home care agencies in the industry. We are advocates, as you know, we're educators. We do routine workshops every, maybe on a bi-weekly basis, just educating the community about the CDPAP program as an option for families, because it's not right for everyone, but at the very least, people should know that it's an option available to them. And I don't know if you know, Paula, but I actually just found out a week ago that case managers under the managed long-term care insurance plans and the local departments of social services, when individuals are going to those case managers to talk about home care services, those case managers now are not required to mention CDPAP as an option for them until the member mentions it first. And I can only suppose, my theory is because New York State is in like a Medicaid debt right now, so maybe they're worried about people, taking advantage of this program. But to be honest with you, this program is very underutilized. So that's why we like to do education to the community and to professionals, as you know, just so that everyone knows it's an option available to them.
Well, again, we want to educate people so when they're in emergency, they will know that your program is, and such a wonderful program. So the other question that a lot of people have is, can the healthcare proxy or power of attorney be the administrator of the services? And also the second part of the question is, can they be the caregiver?
Yes, so under New York State Department of Health rules, regs, and guidelines, the power of attorney and the healthcare proxy can either be the boss of the home care services or the caregiver, the personal assistant. It can't be both at the same time, because that's a conflict, but they can either be the designated representative or the personal assistant, the caregiver. However, different departments of social services, DSS offices, have their own internal policies. Like, so for instance, Suffolk County, I found, is very lax with who they allow to be the designated representative versus the personal assistant, the caregiver. Whereas Nassau County, it's a little bit more stringent with their policies, and they have their own guidelines internally, their own policies, where they may not allow the designated representative to be the POA or the healthcare proxy, or vice versa. They don't allow those people to be the caregivers. So I always recommend whoever the home care payer source is for your loved one needing home care services, you have to ask these questions directly with them. Because New York State can have guidelines, but then the own internal policies of the home care payer sources, it may be different from what New York State Department of Health says.
That's very good advice. Thank
Yes.
you. What is the scope of care that a caregiver is permitted to provide under CDPAP? The other question is, do they have a care plan to follow, and can they administer medication?
Such good questions. This is a frequently asked question from professionals and community members at large. So first, to answer your question, traditional home care services, where an individual needing home care services calls a home care agency and the agency sends a certified caregiver to their home, those certified caregivers, personal care attendants, and home health aides are only permitted to do a certain scope of practice. They're only permitted to physically assist with different activities of daily living, which I know you know: grooming, dressing, bathing, toileting, meal preparation, etc. That's their scope of practice. What's unique about CDPAP is that the scope of practice for the personal assistants, the caregivers, include those activities of daily living, but it's then widened to also include some skilled nursing tasks like ventilator care, tracheotomy care, ostomy care, wound care, and medication administration, which is wild because the caregivers under the CDPAP program, the personal assistants, they're not trained or certified because it's the consumer who takes on the responsibility of training, supervising, and monitoring the work of the caregivers. So it's a little wild that those people aren't trained and certified, but it's because the consumer takes ownership of training them. And then the care plan is in the home, and it's always devised either by the insurance plan, by the case manager at the insurance plan, or the nurse case manager at the local Department of Social Services. And this care plan, it's typically put on the refrigerator within the home, acts as a guide of what the expectations are for the family, for the consumer, and for the caregiver, so that everyone's on the same page of what's expected to be done on a certain frequency. So perhaps showering once a day, toileting X amount of times per day, things like that. So there's no question of, why didn't my caregiver do this today? Well, let's follow the care plan type of thing.
Exactly. Thank you. Who oversees the care from the agency?
The care from the agency in CDPAP, it's unique because it's the consumer who acts as the boss of the home care services, and then the agency providing the CDPAP services is known as a fiscal intermediary, which by definition means we just simply process the payroll for the caregivers. We process the payroll, we help with the enrollment into the program, and then we assist with any additional benefits like workers' comp or disability claims, things like that. Think of us at Community Care as the back of the house payroll processor so that the consumer or the family can be front of the house acting as the boss of their home care services.
That's a really wonderful way to look at it.
It's a nice visual in your head, yeah.
Well, I think you mentioned it a little bit before, but what population do you service? Because I always thought of it as this program for seniors only. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I'll give you a little history lesson if you want, Paula.
Thank you.
So this program actually originated back in the 1970s in New York State by a group of individuals who were physically disabled but alert and oriented. So think they had Parkinson's, they were paralyzed, they had MS. So physically disabled but alert and oriented. Essentially, they said that they wanted more ownership and independence directing their own home care services. They wanted to be their own boss. They wanted the home care agency basically out of the way except for processing the payroll. So they created the Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program. And since then, a consumer-directed home care model has since flourished in every single state in the United States. Do you have any guesses of which state actually has the highest volume of consumer-directed services?
I would think New York, but I'm wrong.
Well, that's where my job security comes in, because I'm educating people about this program because it's underutilized in New York State. And it's very defeating, I think, for me to hear that it started in New York State, but not enough people use this program. It's actually California that has 49% of the population who uses consumer-directed home care services. And it's cute, over in California, the acronym is different for the program. It's known as IHSS, In-Home Support Services, but also BYOC, Bring Your Own Caregiver. How cute is that? I love that. And I'm going to answer your question, but just one other fun fact, Australia only has the consumer-directed home care option. They don't have traditional certified caregiver option. So I just think it's very interesting that the world is changing and a lot of people are gravitating more towards this program because of the heightened level of responsibility and independence. So this program started by a group of individuals who were physically disabled, but it's since flourished to the elderly population, of course, because When you think about mom who has maybe dementia or Alzheimer's, you don't want a stranger coming into the home and then that's going to increase her behaviors or her anxieties. The great thing that you can have ideally is the adult child act as the caregiver and get paid to be the caregiver for your aging parent. Most people are working a 9-to-5 job and then going to their older parents' house anyway to help prepare a meal, get them ready for bed, check in on them, prepare their medication, administer medication. Might as well have them clock in and clock out and get paid for something they're already doing. That's an option to them, right?
Absolutely.
So it's the physically disabled population that we serve, the elderly population, special needs population. They love this program because once the child with special needs is 21 years old, the parent can get paid to be their caregiver, which is such a beautiful thing. And then the last community that really benefits from this program is what I define as like the medically fragile population, individuals who need tracheotomies, feeding tubes, ventilator care, because, like we said, that widened scope of practice, the caregivers are permitted to assist with those items.
If you're considering the possibility of being a caregiver on CDPAP, do you have to do it full time or is there flexibility?
That's a great question. And it's never one size fits all. Every family and individual is going to have a unique situation, like that's catered specifically to them. So first, an individual needing these services has to have Medicaid because this is a Medicaid funded program. But next, they would be assessed by an organization known as the New York Independent Assessor, which would then assign them a weekly bank of hours, depending on how they've answered the nurse's questions. So let's just say that an individual is approved for 40 hours a week. Then that individual, if acting as the boss of their own home care services, if they're alert and oriented, would be assigned with finding their own caregivers. We always recommend to hire many more caregivers than just one, right? Because you want to have backups in place, because who's responsible if that caregiver calls out? The consumer or the designated representative. So I always recommend having just a multitude of people. And to answer your question, caregivers don't have to work full time. They can work truly just 2 hours a week if they wanted to. The consumer can have a primary caregiver and then backup caregivers. It's never one size fits all, but we always recommend to have many caregivers at your disposal enrolled into this program.
I agree with you totally. So what benefits are provided to the caregivers working within Community Care CDPAP program?
A lot of people have this misconception of every home care agency providing CDPAP services offers the same compensation and the same benefits, and that's just not true. That's false information. Every agency has different contracts with different home care payer sources, whether it's the local Department of Social Services or different insurance companies like Aetna, Visiting Nurse Service, Fidelis, etc. The contracts that the home care agency has with those payer sources directly correlates to how much we're able to pay the caregivers, right? That's just basic math. So our compensation for the caregivers ranges from, well, it really depends on the territory. For the Long Island area, it's $19.72 an hour, including Westchester. For the 5 boroughs of New York City, it's $20.59 an hour. And then we also do service the Western New York area, Erie County and Monroe, and that payment is $16.20, just based on minimum wage differences up there. But in addition, I've done my own due diligence shopping around to other home care agencies. To my knowledge, we're the only home care agency providing CDPAP services that provides caregivers with a 401k and health insurance.
That's very good to know that.
Vacation pay, weekly pay, because some people live, paycheck to paycheck. It's very important, weekly pay, as well as we have an exclusive employee perks program, which allows caregivers immediately to receive discounts on over 30,000 retail items, including things like motor vehicle purchases, travel, childcare, groceries, phone bills, etc. And I get excited about that because I'm an employee of Community Care and I also get those discounts. So my phone bill is deeply discounted because of that.
I like that. So how do you prepare for the assessment from the New York Medicaid choice?
A lot of families don't realize that how you tell your loved one's story during that New York Independent Assessor assessment directly correlates with how many hours you're going to be approved for. And I always say you only have one opportunity to best tell your loved one's story, and if you say something the wrong way, you've lost the battle even before the war starts. type of thing. So I always recommend to connect with our team at Community Care prior to scheduling any nursing assessments, because we will then help you realize that CDPAP home care services is defined as a task-based program, meaning that during the nursing assessment, you have to prove that your loved one needs physical assistance with at least 3 activities of daily living, like we talked about before. If you don't prove that they need physical assistance with activities of daily living and instead say things like, I just have to remind mom to use the toilet or supervise her while she's making a meal, that's not going to warrant the justification of any home care services. So it's very important of, knowing how to say things the right way prior to the assessment, and we can help with that.
So it's very important for people to prepare for that. I totally agree with you on that.
Yes.
So could you tell us about the weekly bank hours?
Yes. So traditional home care services, where you work with an agency and they send you a certified caregiver, Medicaid will be very specific with, okay, you're allotted 40 hours a week, but the shifts have to be, for instance, as an example purpose, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That's traditional home care services. But with CDPAP services, there's flexibility. In the same situation, the same scenario, if an individual is approved for 40 hours a week, it's a weekly bank of hours, and then that individual, that consumer, can utilize those hours however they please throughout the week, as long as it doesn't go over 40 hours a week. So they could truly have no home care services on Monday, 13 overnight hours on Tuesday, 2 hours on Wednesday, etc., and as long as it doesn't go over the weekly bank of hours. And speaking as a mother, and I'm sure you know as well, no week is the same, right? So to have Medicaid tell us when the home care hours have to be used, that would be very frustrating to me. I would want more flexibility with my weeks, because one week looks different from the next week and it can always change.
Exactly. So you've been a wealth of information. Is there anything else that you want to share?
So you mentioned very early on that, and you and I have done a lot of work together educating the community. You always mentioned that families should not be making huge choices about like their home care services or next step for their loved ones in times of crises, right? That's the worst time to make a decision, because you're frantic, you don't have enough time to prepare or shop around or do your homework. And just speaking from my own experience, I recently was diagnosed with cancer at 31 years old, and as of last week, I'm officially in remission. Praise be.
So happy about that.
Thank you. But the reason why I mention it is because at 31 years old with a 9-month-old child, I did not expect to be diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, right? You never know what the next day is going to entail. And when you're talking to the caregivers of perhaps their aging elderly parents, there's so many variables to consider. Those caregivers don't know what their health is going to look like within the next few days, months, or years. They don't know what their loved ones, their parents' health is going to look like within the next few days, months, or years. It's very important to have all of your ducks in a row, the resources already available, maybe in a nice folder to access for when the time is right, and to be educated about all the different options available to them, whether it's traditional home care services, CDPAP services, etc., so that they're not making a rushed decision. That's the worst thing that could happen.
That's why this podcast is so important,
Right.
because we need to educate ourselves and know what's out there. I think also your program, I told you before, I've been a social worker for over 30 years. I've used the CDPAP program over many years when people really didn't know about it at all. And I feel sad that a lot of people don't know about it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to know about your program also because there is such a shortage of aides.
Yes.
On Long Island. So it becomes a very viable tool.
You make such a great point. So throughout the nation right now, we really just are in a staffing shortage. But when you think about healthcare, whether it's in hospitals, rehab settings, and even home care, there's a caregiver crisis, a caregiver shortage right now. So CDPAP solves that issue, because then you can hire someone who's already living within the home to be the caregiver for that loved one needing home care services, or even a neighbor or a close family friend who lives down the block. This solves that crisis for so many people. In my experience, CDPAP is just a solution for so many problems that people face as they're aging and needing home care services, and I just think it's such a wonderful program.
Thank you, Meghan, so much. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into our podcast today. Please send us comments about other programs and services you would like to know more about, and please email us at longislandeldercare@yahoo.com if you would like to be on our email list for any future events. Until we meet again.